So hello and welcome everyone to our, I think this is my fourth interview with one of our specialists who is here to help us. Her name is Sabine Fife and she is a Neuro Specialist occupational therapist. Now, these interviews we run for the benefit of our long COVID community, and I'm going to be sharing this interview into the Facebook group as well, the Yoga and Meditation for Gentle COVID Recovery. And that is basically where I have gathered this huge range of questions that I have put to Sabine, and we've worked through them together. And Sabine has said, you know, the ones that are quite specifically an individual asking about their individual symptoms, probably it's inappropriate for us to tackle them, obviously, because, you know, we're so complex as creatures, as human beings, that we would need to have a one-to-one with someone individually to even begin to kind of work stuff out. So what we've done is kind of group some of the questions into themes and topics, which we're going to work our way through. But before we do that, I'm just going to come over to Sabine and ask her to introduce herself and a bit of the work that she's doing and why she really would like to kind of share some of her thoughts and feelings around this. And what I will say is Sabine also, she's just told me, has ME, so has a really bigger understanding, a bigger picture understanding of some of the kinds of things that we're dealing with here today. So Sabine, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Suzy. Hi, everyone. So I've been a neuro OT, so it was just a sort of specialist branch of occupational therapy for quite a while and still work for that team. But I've also recently joined one of the long COVID clinics where I'm an assessor. And obviously my expertise from being a neuro OT carries into that domain. So I specialize in cognition, fatigue, return to work, that kind of thing. A little bit of relaxation, anxiety management. Obviously with the long COVID clinics, we're looking at pain, inflammation, cardiac, respiratory, diet, all sorts of other things as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, that is a good start of a 10, I think. And we have decided, haven't we, that we're going to start with cognition and kind of just brain function, because that seems to be one of the most challenging symptoms a lot of people are experiencing. So actually, let me find the first question on that one. I'm just going to cut to the chase. What are the best neurological tests to have for issues like visual processing disturbance, balance disturbance, cognitive deficiencies? There don't seem to be any tests available to identify and diagnose moderate cognitive deficiencies. So what are your thoughts?
Yes, it's a difficult one, that one, because all of these kind of symptoms that you have with the processing cognition, it's very difficult to fathom out how much of that is your brain just being overwhelmed by its demands. And obviously, if you think of sensory processing, information you're taking in through your ears, your eyes, in your environment, through touch, smell, taste. There's a lot going on for the body. And when you're particularly fatigued, so if that symptom crops up alongside fatigue, it's actually really difficult to fathom out whether it's just your fatigue saying stop, because your body actually naturally wants to shut down when it's fatigued. It's a self-protective mechanism. So the first thing that tends to go is the brain, because the brain is so complex and you're using a lot of areas all at the same time. Actually, your brain just says, that's a little bit too much for me. So that light is too bright, that noise is too loud. It's a little bit, if you think about autism and the sensory processing that goes on in autism, you know, you see autistic people with covering to their ears or eyes, you know, they tend to get more anxious, they tend to get more overwhelmed when it gets too bright, too loud, too much in the environment. So it's similar to that, really, that our sensory processing just says, I can't deal with it. I can't actually coordinate all these things, integrate all these things, work out what's what. So that's probably what it is. So I always say that if somebody comes up with those kind of symptoms, we need to look at whether that individual actually is suffering from fatigue. The chances with post-COVID syndrome are that you are suffering from fatigue. So the bottom of the pyramid that we're looking at is always, we're going to deal with the biggest chunk first. And it tends to be, in our experience, the fatigue is the biggest symptom. A lot of people aren't actually completely aware just how fatigued they are, because they're almost hyperstimulated. So they're almost fidgety and a little bit more on edge, a bit more irritable. and they're not really quite understanding why they have this brain fog until we sort of talk it through. But there are a high proportion of post-COVID sufferers who are very conscious of the fact just how fatigued they are.
Yes, it was interesting just listening to you talk about that, because when I was at my most unwell last year, I had so much adrenaline in me that I found it almost impossible to sleep. And so people kept saying, oh, I have this terrible fatigue. And I'd say, gosh, well, I don't. But of course I must have been, because I just really wasn't sleeping. I
Exactly.
just said, you know, I'm struggling to sleep. And I would be really envious of these people that would say, I've had 15 hours sleep today and I just like, I can't get enough.
I actually hear that a lot, Suzy. I hear that a lot, and I've experienced it myself as well. So I'm a sort of fellow sufferer of that. So what happens there is that your autonomic nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, is overstimulated.
Absolutely.
And is struggling to kick in. So you're in fight and flight the whole time. So it's a physical chemistry in the body where, you know, your endocrine system is just completely out of sync. So there's no homeostasis, which is another word for equilibrium, balance within the body. And therefore that kind of, you know, the cogs keep turning when you're trying to wind down to sleep, and you have this kind of itchiness and buzzing and in you, and you can't actually just rest and drift off to sleep and become, you just become jealous of partners. You can just drift off into sleep, and you some people, including myself, I recognize, you know, I'm tired, but something is stopping me from going into that sleep state. And, you know, we can talk a lot about, and you're perfectly placed for that, you know, what you can do about sort of breathing, relaxation, etc. to try and tap into that parasympathetic nervous system. A lot of sleep hygiene, obviously, that can be followed. You know, especially things like caffeine, sort of forgetting about stimulants, high carb meals towards the end of the day, basically increasing your sugar levels. If you've got increased sugar levels, you will actually find it's a bit like when you've been drinking, you know, when you've been out drinking, you've had a half a bottle of wine or whatever, you might fall asleep quickly, but you'll find you keep waking up. It's not refreshing sleep. And, you know, it's very disturbed sleep. So sleep is key on the road to recovery, really, because we heal in our sleep. When you've got that coexistence of fatigue and not being able to sleep, you know, that's a really bad combo.
Yes. Yes, definitely. So there's a question here. Is there some kind of training of the brain that we should do? Like, should we do breathing exercises? Should we do cognitive exercises? You know, is there anything that there is out there that people recommend to get your brain kind of functioning again?
No, if we're talking about fatigue and cognitive losses due to fatigue, due to being really fatigued, whether it's an ME type of fatigue, which is a sort of encephalomyelitis type of fatigue, where you're, you know, more in the ME bracket, and you have that sort of post-exertion syndrome, malaise, and almost kind of, you know, your existing COVID symptoms seem to be coming back every time you do something. You are in that bracket of dysfunctional, dysregulated stage. So those people most definitely shouldn't be exerting themselves. And if you're thinking about cognition a little bit like an electricity meter, for example, you've got the little cog round the side that shows whether electricity is being used, and that's turning all the time, even though the numbers aren't actually going round. You know, eventually that number will go conk. That little wheel keeps turning, and it's a bit like that, just being in an environment that has some sort of stimulus in it. So sitting on the settee watching television isn't an actual rest, because you're because you're having to process the visual information, you're having to process the audio, and you're having to process to kind of follow a plot, or, you know, maybe some distraction in the kitchen because somebody's talking to you from over there. So that's kind of, you're sitting down, but your cogs are turning. So using cognitive rehab in form of trying to retrain the brain, like you might do after a stroke, for example, there's a kind of sense in that, because you're trying to lay down new pathways. You're trying to use other parts of your brain. There is a definite good reason for cognitive rehab, but when you're dealing with chronic fatigue, go hand in hand, obviously, and are the cause of brain fog, you don't really then want to go and find ways to stimulate your brain, because really just getting through the day, there's quite enough stimulus in it. So I wouldn't recommend it for people who are fatigued, because we're dealing with a fatigue. We're kind of hoping that the cognition will kick back in and it'll normalize itself. Dealt successfully with the fatigue.
It's really great to hear you say that, because I believe that, and I've seen that time and time again. Lots of people who, you know, for many months were saying, I've lost my brain, you know, it's never going to come back, and now it's coming back. You know, their body has found that kind of homeostasis again, and it's beginning to come back, and people are kind of beginning to carry on. And it's not about retraining. There hasn't been damage and a loss there. It's almost like you don't get access to it for a bit, because the body kind of goes, you just need to not be doing that. Just focus on recovery, focus on rest.
Absolutely right. I mean, the body, if you do listen to the body, it will actually tell you, and the body, the response of the body telling you that something is too much is actually fatigue, and it's actually a dysregulated temperature system. You know, if you're going hot and cold all the time, you're fatigued, or your brain is wanting to shut down. Well, they're all good signs of your body to say, I can't cope with any more. And instead of pushing through it, which a lot of people, perhaps particularly younger people, and I'm not being sexist here, but particularly the younger male, I found in my assessment, you know, they were previously maybe very fit, they were runners, you know, they've got their testosterone, they're ready to go. And then all of a sudden I'm telling them, well, actually, no, you shouldn't be exercising because your body's not ready for it. There's a natural instinct to say, come on, I'm going to lose my peak, I'm going to decondition. And there is a good reason not to exercise until your body can take it. And there's also a good reason not to allow yourself to decondition. So it's a bit of, you know, we do recommend you go out for at least 20 minutes a day, you know, roll up the sleeves, expose your face and your arms to the sun, walk as slowly as you need to so you don't become breathless, and don't walk further than you know is adequate. Just listen to your body, tune into your body. But we wouldn't recommend, you know, people go on a static bike or a treadmill and start doing cardio exercise when the bodies are shouting, I'm not ready.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I think one of the things, because we've been, as you know, been running live classes now since September of last year. And one of the things that we say is just come in right down at base level, and even don't even go out for a walk. Don't go to the supermarket. Don't do anything else. Just do the class. And we do static recumbent work. And then as people begin to get a bit of strength and they understand that they've got the tolerance there, then you add a little bit of weight and resistance. And so it's a really, really slow process. And it's actually one of the toughest things, you know, because not just the guys are worried about losing their condition. There's so many people in the group who are runners, who are avid mountaineers, who are climbers, who are canoeists, who are swimmers, who are tennis players. And they're going, but I want to go back and exercise. And actually trying to unpick that habit that, you know, as soon as you start to feel a bit better, I'll go for, you know, a bit of a workout because I'm ready. Oh, and right back at the beginning. So, you know, we try to not call it exercise. We call it autonomic retraining. We're just going to build you back up from under baseline so that your body doesn't pick it up on the danger radar.
Absolutely. I think that's really wise. And that's a good term as well. Because it is almost like retraining of your nervous system.
Right.
You've got that disparity, you know, your body doesn't know whether it's coming or going, nor do your senses or your brain, you know, your cognition, your lungs. It's I mean, COVID is a inflammatory condition, and it's a virus that will target the weakest part in your body. If you've got any building sites, it'll find it. And it can become systemic. And once it becomes like that, it really affects your blood pressure, your hypothalamus. It affects the way your endocrine, your immune system. It is you know, a neuro condition when it does that systemically, because it impacts on every system in your body.
I can remember myself having to wear ear defenders because I couldn't tolerate the noise of my children. Some other people will be like, well, I feel like that all the time anyway. But this was, you know, I had a sort of an awareness of what it might be like to be autistic. So I couldn't cope with noise. I couldn't cope with sound. I couldn't cope with television. I couldn't read a book. I couldn't have lights on. I couldn't have you know, it was everything shut down. And my body just sort of went, don't have any stimulus at all. And I even developed a stammer. Don't talk to me because I can't talk. It was really fascinating to have an insight into that.
Yes, it is actually. It is an eye opener, and I think there are, you know, as much as we're suffering with all of this, I think there are some good insights going to come out of this pandemic and have suffered the condition. It's certainly increasing our insights, and it's certainly also changing how, you know, the services are responding to any of the resources that are available out there and any of the support that's out there. So it's a huge shift, actually. Monies are going into certain directions to facilitate that recovery by lending that support. So there's some good that will come out of it. And certainly there's been a very increased insight into this fatigue syndrome, whether you know, you belong into the sort of ME category or whether you belong more into the sort of chronic fatigue category, depending on whether your autonomic nervous system has been affected to a certain degree. You know, if you're kind of POTS type features, which is your postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. So if you're having those kind of racing hearts, low blood pressure on standing,
dizziness on standing,
exactly, lightheadedness, all of that. If you're having those kind of features, the chances are, you know, it's more than just your generalized chronic fatigue. So there are different pathways in which to treat it, and there would be different advice on, you know, how to go about things and how to sequence your recovery. I was saying earlier on about the kind of, with your exercise classes that you're doing, and I have sent people
exercise classes.
Well, I know, well, exactly, the fact that it is a reconditioning the whole homeostasis of your body. It's a reconditioning. So people always ask for exercise, you know, I don't want to become deconditioned. And I always say, well, I can send you here. And they go, oh, good. Do they do exercise? And I say, well, they do, but they have a COVID cohort, and they really get it, and they know that what you have to do has to be a very gradual process. So it's not to decondition, but it's also about the mindfulness, the awareness of your body, your mind, the centering, the relaxation, the breathing, all of those things. And you just need a little bit of help with that. I think a lot of people new to that kind of what they think is exercise, they're new to that kind of concept. And actually that's all they can do. And the very baby steps to build up once they've laid down the foundations, and they can hold themselves in that day without feeling absolutely exhausted. So once you can do that, then you, like you say, you can build up on your activity.
There's so many questions that I want to ask now as a part of this, but I'm going to move on with the questions that we have written down. Otherwise we'll be here forever. Some of us won't or haven't been referred to an actual neurologist, or won't for a long period of time. So what do they recommend we do for self-help? Or how do we repair this brain fog, the neurological overload, and what help could we expect when we do get to see someone?
Okay, so we've got, I mean, in this part of the world, there is a new pathway now for kind of neurological, cognitive observations, assessments, and rehab. So I can only speak for sort of our local area. I suspect it's very similar in other parts of the country. What you can expect is a full neurological assessment, and if you're going for the kind of cognitive assessment, if it's particular difficulties that you're having with memory, attention, processing, that kind of thing, they would carry out a cognitive assessment. It's what I would normally do when I work for my neuro team, but we don't do that for the COVID team because we do a generalized assessments. But there is a signposting, a referral pathway for that. So if you're finding that the fatigue hasn't tapped into the cognition, so if there's no change to the cognition, even though the fatigue's got better, I think again, we've got to think, is this a separate entity? Is this something that needs further investigation? But I don't know about my colleagues, but I think we're sort of on common ground here. obviously because I work for the neuro team as well. So my finding is that there's absolutely no point in having your cognition assessed if you haven't dealt with the fatigue, because we've got to make sure which is which, and it's a process of elimination. So if your fatigue is responding to the resources and the guidance given to that, and you're able to pace, and you're able to plan and prioritize your day, you're able to grade your activities, you're able to conserve energy in the way that we try and teach you in our assessment and with the resources we send out, and that's working for you, you should notice. And I will actually say 9 out of 10 of the patients that I review after about 6 weeks or so, they all say, actually, that's got a lot better now, because their fatigue has got better.
Yeah.
So you save yourself a lot of hassle and heartache, and, you know, having to get to the assessment, and, you know, a lot of the anxiety that goes with, you know, going to a hospital or going to a clinic. Just by focusing on one thing at a time. And I would recommend that you don't try and deal with too many of the symptoms all at once. Like I said before, if you imagine a pyramid, the fatigue tends to be the biggest chunk of that. So if we deal with that, anything further up the pyramid tends to get better. If it doesn't, obviously you'd have to address it.
And I'm just curious then, if someone did come to you, because I know one of the questions has been asked by a doctor here, and I know that she is feeling on the whole quite a lot better, but she's saying, you know, how can we regain our cognitive stamina and functioning? Because while she's got on top of most of her other symptoms and her fatigue, that part is still something that isn't quite how it should be for her.
Exactly. So, I mean, that would be the point where, depending on which clinic they're under. So if under our clinic, you know, we would send them down that pathway I was talking about, down towards the neurologist to have a full cognitive assessment and all the tests go with it. That part is to probably there'd be quite a few blood tests as well to see, you know, inflammatory markers and all the sort of other pathology that comes with it, just to see how much of that is biological, how much of that is physiological, to find the cause of that. And I mean, if you have ME, if you had very, very bad fatigue, it is possible that your brain can be affected. It can be inflamed. So the vessels in your brain can be inflamed, and it can cause some cognitive losses. Predominantly, we're finding that the people who had very reduced SATs, so their respiration was quite low and their O2 was quite low, you know, sort of below 92, maybe 87, 83, that kind of thing. And
that's very low, isn't it? Yeah.
Those ones that were sort of almost a little bit hypoxic in effect. That's a different kettle of fish, because we're dealing with starvation of oxygen. And that's a very specialized area. So again, you know, there's absolutely no way that we would want to give someone advice on that, because we recognize, but they should actually be under a team for follow-up from the ITU that they were on. So they're called in for follow-up, and really they're heading on that, they're leading on that. It wouldn't us so much, because there's an identified higher risk with that group of patients.
Right. So that's a really good kind of marker, I think, for some people. If people know that they have had that much lower oxygen saturation level, yeah, okay, worth following up. And don't just be told it's fatigue.
No, exactly. I mean, there's a good reason, and I think most people are aware. There's only a small percentage that just seem to have that awareness, but most people are certainly have the signs and know when they're really fatigued. So this group, the ITU group, also might have a lot of trauma, etc. They're just a bit more challenging and clinically more difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Now this one is sort of part of someone's question, but I'm just going to expand it slightly. Someone is saying they'd be interested to know if the changes to the brain from COVID can physically cause anxiety, whereas perhaps before there just really wasn't any. So, you know, post the acute phase and then into recovery, as people are moving down the line with it, is part of the neurological experience likely or possible to show up as a sort of an increased level of anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going slightly away from the cognition. This is going more into the kind of mental health. And there's a part in the assessment where we speak about mental health. And I think I said to you earlier, You know, people are getting themselves a mental health label. And on the depression side, it's not necessarily a clinical depression, although people are answering those questions, the low mood is very evident, but it tends to be more of a frustration of not being able to do what they did before. And a kind of almost, you're losing a sense of self and identity because, you know, you have a role, maybe a professional role, or you're a mother or father, or, you know, and you can't fulfill your role. So it's a frustration and an anger and resentment, and it's a problem with the acceptance side of that, and thinking, you know, how can they integrate all of this now and normalize. With the anxiety, it tends to be more of a physiological thing. It tends to be more the fact that they're caught in that fight and flight and the sympathetic nervous system. So it's that autonomic thing again. You know, it does tend to cause agitation, irritation. You know, you're losing your cool more quickly, you're more snappy, you're more alert, you're maybe more self-conscious, and you just can't settle. It's those kind of people that are finding the actual getting off to sleep really hard. Or they're falling asleep out of exhaustion, and they're only having their first sleep of 4 to 4.5 hours. And then they wake up and the brain starts to kick in, and it's just, and you just can't block it out, and so you can't go back to sleep.
I think that, I mean, I know I personally experienced that a lot, and I see that a lot being discussed in the Facebook group. I also remember in the first sort of, I suppose in week 6 to sort of 12 to 14, when it was really kind of having a field day in my body, the kind of, you know, the post-acute phase, there would just be moments where I'd be in the middle of doing something and I'd burst into tears. It would be like I'd fallen into a pit of darkness and then I'd come up again. And I thought, gosh, this must be part of it. So I can remember kind of asking into, you know, other kind of social media groups at the time, is anyone else just bursting into tears with this? And, you know, 1,000 people went, yes, actually, we really
absolutely are. Yeah, that's that emotional ability, definitely. And it's just your body is finding that whole regulation really difficult. It's not just physical, it's emotional, it's, you know, everywhere, it's systemic. So of course, it does have an impact on mood regulation as well.
Right. I know, and I think we're so used to taking, you know, when we think about ourselves now in the West, we think about ourselves as individual sort of separate symptoms. And actually, one of the things I really love about you know, systems like the Chinese medical system or the Ayurvedic system is they look at you as a system, which is all joined up, because which is, you know, that makes sense. We are the nervous system joins the body up, the body joins up to the brain. You know, we can't separate out these symptoms. So for me, as I was sort of on the roller coaster ride of, oh, what will happen next, I kept on thinking it's my system responding. It's not just now I've lost my speech or now I've got tinnitus. It's my systemic response to what's happening inside me. And I think it can be really difficult sometimes to kind of come back to that reassurance of whatever's going on for me, I just need to kind of calm myself down. I need to calm myself down.
Yes, that's really important. So the pathological changes, they're consistent with neurological disorders. So it's a dysfunction in your nervous system and not necessarily a psychiatric condition.
Right.
It mimics a psychiatric condition, because when you're doing the sort of assessments about anxiety and depression, the answers that you give very high scores. So yes, it does look like it's a psychiatric condition, but actually the causation of it is caused through that neurological disorder in your body, which is affecting you in a certain way. And then the outcome of that is low mood, and the outcome of that is anxiety. So it's a slightly, it's similar, but not the same. And like you say, if we just keep reminding ourselves that, you know, we are where we are, because it's a very difficult journey, because we're talking about acceptance, we're talking about being flexible to actually adapt to the change. It's a change in role. I mean, we've got people who are finding sexually they're struggling with their partners because physically they're too fatigued, or the respiration or the cardiac symptoms are making that side of things really difficult. The physical relationships, you know, they're suffering here because people just aren't able. So it's impacting on every part of someone's life.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so, I mean, it's so much to take on. And you know that, and I think it's really important to stress here that there are people who have got organ damage. You know, there is damage that has happened as a result of this. This is not all just the autonomic nervous system going haywire. There is, you know, a genuine group of people who are not getting negative results back from their tests. They are getting, oh yes, you've got this now, and this has happened. And you know, that's a whole other set of issues and challenges that people are
Exactly.
facing.
Exactly. There is, I mean, people have, you know, there's quite a lot of the pathology is not right, you know, and a lot of the patients we're seeing, you know, or people are developing skin conditions, or, you know, sort of organically, like you say, damage done through the inflammation. And really the overarching lesson is that, you know, there is an inflammatory response in your body. And the best way, of course, to deal with that is to try and preempt it and try and go against it, find the antidote to that inflammation. And we know that cortisol levels go up in the body when we're stressed, and we know that cortisol can inflame us. We know that lack of sleep can drive up cortisol, or too much REM sleep can drive up cortisol. And we know that histamines can be inflammatory as well. So, you know, there is a place for antihistamines in certain people who might be responding to that. There is a place for, you know, sleep counseling, you know, where people are finding they're getting to sleep really, really hard, maybe because of their anxiety. There's a place for the sleep hygiene and just the fatigue management and the pacing, and a place for finding a way to change your breathing pattern, because even that can calm down your nervous system. So bring down the inflammation through diet, sleep, pacing, good breathing, relaxation. That's really important. And there are some supplements that are being advised as well. For example, vitamin D helps sleep, or, you know, that's kind of still out there, but I think we're coming around to that way of thinking. There's certainly a place for vitamin D and MS, so there's a correlation there. And there's a place for CoQ10 as an energy piece, which basically a POTS doctor that we've personally seen has recommended, because it's the energy released from the mitochondria in the cell. So I'm not in a position to recommend these things, because that's my role here, but I'm just saying people can clue up on these side of things, you know, make up their own mind. But if you research it, there's a lot that can be done in terms of diet, and maybe eating a low histamine diet. You have to always look at the individual. Some people are maybe underweight, and it may not be the right thing for them, because they can cause themselves to decrease their weight further, which wouldn't help at all if you're fatigued. So you have to sort of do your background research, and then find the right individual who can maybe advise you on that topic that you're interested in, that you want to try, that you feel is right for you.
Well, I think as well, you know, it's about trying something out for a few days and seeing if it makes a difference. You know, when I was first put on a very strong antihistamine to help me with sleep, not only did it help me with sleep, within 24 hours, some of my symptoms had completely abated. And I was so shocked that, you know, I thought, my God, I'm never going to come off these. These are great. This has changed my life. You know, this is now I'm moving into a new phase of this. And, you know, I think I see a lot of people trying the MCAS protocol, the mast cell activation protocol, and doing the low histamine and following the kind of stack. And there's a consultant called Dr. Tina Pierce that we've all kind of listened to her interviews on. And, you know, people have been kind of flogging away at it for weeks and weeks going, when will I notice the difference? And part of me is thinking, yeah, you should probably have noticed a difference within about a week of this, maybe 2 weeks. And I think, you know, if you're not noticing a difference and it's making you grumpy, then stop.
Exactly. It is a process of elimination. Absolutely. What's right for one person isn't necessarily right for the other. And like we said earlier on, each individual will have, although it's the same disease, each individual will have a slightly different journey, because none of us are the same. We're all individuals. We have different motivators. We've got different interests. We've got different roles in our lives as professionals and personal human beings. So that's really important, to individualize and tailor the programs, which is what we do when we assess people. We try and tailor it to their need. And what works for one in terms of supplements or antihistamines or particular diets doesn't necessarily work for the other. And you also need to look at past medical history. It's quite complex, have you got any underlying conditions, any comorbidities? And then, you can already sort of tell what might work for that individual and what might not. But at the end of the day, it's that individual has to try that safely, of course. They have to try these different ways for themselves to make that call, am I feeling better? That's really the only way you're going to do it. There's no magic cure for anyone. There are courses out there, there is research out there, but at the end of the day, we can't make those promises.
And I think that's what's so fascinating about this group of people, and not just my Facebook group, but other groups, they're all willing to try stuff out because they know help isn't going to come and find them. So ever since kind of, April last year, we've all just been sharing, what have you tried? What are you doing? And, going out and buying ourselves very expensive probiotic, or going out and buying ourselves CoQ10 and sort of, am I changed? Is it helping? And I think what's great is we start to see patterns where people, we can start to say, well, actually, if you've tried this and this and this, have you tried this? Because I think that might be the piece that's missing from the puzzle. And, you get to share some of that experimentation with people much earlier on in their journey now.
Exactly.
Someone will join the group and say, oh, I'm long COVID since February. And you're like, February. Okay, great. This is what we can tell you. Know this, try this, do that, go there. And,
exactly.
It's so empowering to be able to kind of give them tried and tested anecdotal, obviously, information to say, go experiment with these things because they might help you.
Yes, and I will say, as you're mentioning the probiotics, you're probably going to have to take that for about 4 weeks to notice the difference.
Yeah.
And that's particularly for those people who've maybe suffered a lot with their bladder and bowel, and maybe they've been on antibiotics
gastro issues,
during the actual events, and maybe after the event as well. People sometimes got UTIs, or they've had diarrhea or whatever. So these kind of people, it's definitely worth saying to them, you should try that because you've been on antibiotics, or you should try that because part of your disease progression was that you developed gastrointestinal issues. So that's always worth a try with them, and you would need to probably do a course of about 4 weeks to see if it's any different. Antihistamines, they should work instantly. You'll know that's the right thing or the wrong thing for you. For those people who are suffering with their kind of electrolytes as well, not enough salt, or they're faint, or whatever. Sometimes electrolytes can work for them as well. But for those more complex ones who have those kind of issues, I would always recommend that they go and do that under supervision of their GP.
Yeah, great. We're going to move on. Yeah. And we're going to explore the kind of going back to work and daily routines. So, and actually this came up in the group chat today, because someone was saying that she'd got a new job, and it was going to be starting in, a month or so. And she was saying, I'm not really feeling better. So that story was just kind of triggered when I read this. So I just want to know what I should do, says one of my lovely people here. Daily routines, exercises, getting back to work. Should I stop everything until I feel better? I've been slowly recovering while working part-time. It helps my mood. But now I think maybe I should just cease the work. The only activities I can do without raising my stress numbers are bird watching and art, which obviously isn't going to earn you a ton of money unless you're very good at art. What devices or signals do they suggest we listen to from our body? Like, what's a warning sign and what's just the pain of reconditioning? Sometimes I feel like I have dementia. Is that right?
Yeah, bless them. Yeah, whoever they are, that's tough. And it's a very, I feel for you because that's so common. I hear this a lot in the assessments that I do, and it's encompassing a lot of the different areas, isn't it, as well? Yeah. So yeah, definitely. When we send out resources tailored to the individual, quite often we send out the fatigue management leaflet, which becomes the Bible, really. If you've got fatigue, you've got to deal with that side first, and build an insight into energy conservation, which can apply to you. So working out what's like what's in your diary, what do you do in your day. And it sounds like this person isn't able to do very much, but she is working part-time. So probably the chances are that all her energy is going into her part-time work.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing left, and no spoons left, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're all spent. This is why pacing is so important. So the people that I've had who've maybe gone and reduced their hours to 4 or maybe 6 hours a day from 8, they're going flat out. If you're going in for 6 hours, you don't even need that half an hour. Legally, you don't need that half an hour sustenance break. So they're going flat out for the entire time. But actually, I'm saying, no, you can't do that. You can't, because you're spent. And also, there's not enough energy left to get back safely in the car after they've taken them to work. Or they've had a difficult journey into work. They've been in the 8 o'clock traffic or whatever. And all the cognitive processes, what you're using up just for the concentration, you're already arriving completely worn out.
Yeah.
So the pacing and the energy conservation for someone considering work, going back to work, being at work part-time is really important. And we also send out advice now to the employer to make them aware of how this chronic fatigue affects people with post-COVID syndrome, so that there's advice going directly to the employer, which they can print off and give to them. We're working with HR, occupational health departments, and we're quite often writing phased return to work plans. That's what OTs. And so we tailor the plan according to what their job entails, how far they have to travel, what their working hours are, that kind of thing, because that's really has to be tailored. It's not one size fits all.
No. And the more I sort of witness people attempting to return to work with a sort of a very mediocre phased return in place, which doesn't necessarily allow for them to have a break that's a proper break, the more you just think you're going to be back off again within a matter of days or weeks. And I think actually people, I would encourage people to be really brave and have honest, open conversations with their employers and just say, I know I won't be able to do that, but this is what I think I can do. This is what I know would probably work, but can we try it out, and to sort of be their own, champion in a way, because that boom bust, that post-exertional malaise, I think everyone is familiar with it now. If you go back to work and you just do that tiny bit too much for too long, it's possible, it's not always guaranteed, but it's possible it will bite you.
Oh, it does happen. I've got so many people who've had 2 or 3 failed phased returns because basically their phased returns have been factored in over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no way you can do this in any less than 6 weeks.
No.
So there's a strategy to it. There needs to be a sequence. There needs to be a really good plan. There needs to be really good communication, like you say, with the employer, with the HR, occupational health department. And it needs to happen in a certain way. It's a very, very individualized thing, and that's what OTs do. So I would never just ask HR or occupational health to be the ones putting a phased return to work plan together. It really would involve the OT. And if you're under a long COVID clinic, you've got access to that. So I like you say, there are legal rights. There's actually a legal sort of pathway now for people returning to work post-COVID. And I can share some of those links with you maybe later. And you can...
Great. I can post them underneath the video when I put it in the group. So that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I think people, there's a big swathe of people who are getting to the point, maybe they've been kind of 16 months plus, and they're getting to the point where they're going, I'm going to have to do this at some point. And I think just the anxiety of it in itself is causing more symptoms to come up, and it makes people more and more panicked. Oh my God, I've got this date coming towards me. And the more it gets near, the less ready I feel.
Yep. I've had that. I've strangely enough had a lot of teachers returning to work.
Yeah, right.
And I've had a lot of that, that they've had this date and they've maybe already had 1 or 2 failed phased returns to work, and they've had to focus on this date. And I've had to say to them, why don't you just go to your school and see whether you can have a year off, but return sooner if you're better by then.
Yeah.
and just sort of negotiate, if you're of course in a financial position to do that, because a lot of people have got the financial pressures as well.
Right, of course.
But you know, I've had some lucky patients who were in a position to do that, and as soon as you took the pressure off, actually their recovery followed. I've had a lot of people who are from the first wave, so last March, who are teachers, who have this year successfully come out the other side. They're back at work and, you know, feeling good. So it does happen. I just want to, at this point, maybe it's a good time to say, I just want to give people hope, because there is recovery. And you're, you know, you're a true sign of that.
Yeah.
There is recovery if you do it properly. And I think a lot of the time we're fighting against this. We're fighting against our own body and our own minds because we just don't want to give into it. We had that little talk just before we started recording, and it is that kind of having to accept and having to almost give yourself into it, resettle, and then go again. And do it strategically and build up your routine. You know, you've got to get through a routine of gentle bobbing waves throughout the day without feeling a level of exhaustion, because as soon as you start to feel exhausted, you know that you should have rested before. So you've got to become very good at knowing yourself and what you can load onto yourself. So if you imagine the scales and you've got activity here and rest here, if you can keep it like that, that's great. You load on too much activity, you know, your fatigue is going to go up. We're just looking at keeping it even. We're not looking at any tricks or doing anything fancy. We just want to keep it balanced. And when we do that, when we import balance, you know, the body will eventually go, okay, and it will start to heal. And I know that's not true for everyone, because some people have had, like you said, more severe
Absolutely.
Injuries really to, you know, internally, and they've you know, they've got very complex needs, and they clearly should be under a respiratory consultant or a cardiologist, etc., or a neurologist. So there are those that definitely can't just do this with resources and self-help. But for the ones, you know, maybe probably about 60–70% of post-COVID syndrome, there is an awful lot that can be done with just following advice and self-help resources. We have seen those people become better. And so I just want to instill hope, really, and say to people, you know, the good thing is the peer support. Don't isolate yourself. You're not on your own. It's happening to an awful lot of people, and there's good advice out there, and I'll do my best to try and put up some links for you so that you can all benefit from those.
Great, thank you. There's a question that I would like to ask, actually, and it's about the vagus nerve. So we talk quite a lot about the vagus nerve, and I'm quite interested in polyvagal theory, the idea that, you know, the parasympathetic can't kind of activate if the vagus nerve is kind of out of tone, and we need to feel safe for all of that to start sort of working as it should do.
Yeah.
Is that something that you talk about in your work? Is that
I have maybe once or twice, because maybe somebody else has mentioned it to me that I've been assessing, because they've maybe read up on it, but we don't normally go into that sort of level of detail. I have maybe with one or two patients. I remember the conversation. I think, you know, it can get very complex the more into detail you go. And I also have a book about the polyvagal theory, which is so interesting. And it certainly is something that's very apparent in the more POTS type people. You know, there's a problem that actually you can go, it's a vagus nerve. They do vagus nerve stimulators now, gamma core and all those kind of things, don't they? So the vagus nerve is quite an important nerve when it comes to that kind of dysautonomia, you know, where your autonomic nervous system isn't in sync.
Yeah.
But it's the same advice, really. I wouldn't sort of go into too much detail with patients. I normally just give them the same advice about trying to buy into your parasympathetic nervous system to subdue the sympathetic.
Right.
So it is about following all the kind of advice, especially with breathing. So if for example your heart is racing, your brain will pick up, oh, my heart's racing, I must be anxious. You know, there must be either something that I should be fearful about or some stress that's happening. and it's a response, you know. So, and vice versa as well. If you're feeling anxious, then your heart's going to start to race. So it's that kind of, how do we control that? How do we get back on track? And it is about using the breath predominantly. Anxiety management through the breath is a really good tool, and I send out that resource to most of my patients. And really just doing the good work that you do, you know, the kind of, it's exactly that. You know, if people can, it will be alien to a lot of people because they've never dealt with this and they've never had to think like that. But actually, it's kind of like a re-education of your autonomic nervous system, isn't it? We were talking about earlier.
Totally. But also, I think, you know, we're so conditioned in our sort of system to take, give me the drug. What pill am I waiting for that's going to help with this? And actually, you know, it's really difficult to say to someone, there isn't really the drug, but there's some work that you could try and we think it will make a difference. And people look at you and go, I've never been this ill in my life. How, don't be crazy that you think that that's the way out. But actually, I think, you know, so many people now have come to the point of just trusting, okay, so I've tried everything else and nothing else has really worked. I'll give this a go because I've got no other option to me, you know. And I think, you know, people, again, caveat, you know, as long as there's nothing really seriously going on with the body that has been picked up in tests, et cetera, people are beginning to notice the difference. And that then becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They start to feel a bit better more regularly, and then the system starts to settle. And our bodies, I think, are amazing at healing themselves. They will, given the right conditions.
Yes, you're absolutely right. They will. Although I will say that pharma has its place.
Of course,
you know, pharma has its place for those people who genuinely are really seriously depressed. You know, then pharma does have its place. You can't always pull everyone out of the really low mood, or
agreed.
Always get patients to help themselves out of really bad anxiety, especially if the cause of it is physiological. So it's a anxiety. And if you do get tachycardia, you know, there are, you know, certain drugs.
I think beta blockers have been such a savior for so many in the group, and I definitely went through a phase of taking them myself, which was, you know, fantastic. And SSRIs as well for so many people. It's just helped them find center in order to begin to move
exactly
forward. I'm a big
That's exactly right. So sometimes you just need the pharma to kick back in. It's a bit like taking melatonin to understand your circadian rhythms better, to know when is night and when is day. You know, when am I active and when should I be sleeping? If your body's forgotten how to do it and you're just wanting to sleep all day and you're like a night owl, taking something like melatonin might do the trick. So there's a time and a place for everything. And this is teaching us to really become in tune with our bodies and our minds, and really increase self-awareness and gain insights. And there's a lot of research out there going on long enough. There are a lot of resources that people can tap into.
Yeah, I'm definitely, you know, I'm definitely not anti-pharma, but I think I'm also aware of the limitations for the recovery from this kind of thing. You know, and yes, there's things that we can take to help us when we need them, but they're not gonna treat the systemic issue that's happening for a lot of people. Okay, let's find one question that we can kind of move us towards close, because I'm aware I don't want to drain your battery. My battery's already drained today.
Yes.
So actually, and it's a question that I'm sure all of us would be interested to hear your thoughts on, because pretty much all of us are looking at screens. So some days I just cannot look at screens. It feels like my eyes are super strained, but it's not really my eyes. And she's been to the optometrist. It's like my brain has been zapped, she says. Do they have any recommendations for how to relieve that and to get through a work day? Because so many of us now are dependent on the screen to work.
So we're talking about visual processing, really. So if you're looking at a screen, you've got probably the contrast of the screen and the bright light coming at you is quite a lot for your brain to deal with. So you're taking in the information through your eyes, but it's actually at the back of your head that you're processing that information, and it shoots forwards to the parietal lobe. So there's a, you know, your visual pathway takes up quite a bit of space in your brain. So Understandably, also with the sensory issues that we're finding in post-COVID syndrome is that it can be overwhelming. The bright light itself can be overwhelming, plus then having to process the information through that bright light. So best idea is to turn down the brightness on the screen, try and get one of those protective screens, like a blue light filter. Limit your time on the screen, lots of eye exercises, if you have to look at the screen, then look up and look into the distance and then look back at the screen. Don't just kind of hold your eyes focused until they want to pop out and get really dry. It's important to keep moving your eyes away from the screen whenever you can, and just limiting the amount of time that you spend with actual time away from the screen. So then we're almost going into the pacing and the fatigue management again.
Right.
Because you're using your cogs again, you're processing visual information. So that can be really tiring, and your eye strain will become much more apparent the more you're using them.
So actually what you're giving us there are some great tips on how to pace screen usage in a healthy way.
Yes, I think so. Not just that, but also the whole kind of turning down the brightness.
Yeah.
And
I've got blue light blocking glasses. They're a good thing.
Excellent. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, they're really good. They're really in now. So yeah, that's fab. And a lot of people are finding, they go outside and it's too bright to go outside. So, do wear sunglasses. Do start to wear reactor light lenses. If you're a glasses wearer, just go to the optician, have reactor lights put in. So then you haven't got to think about getting your sunglasses out. It'll do it automatically for you. Or, some people might actually benefit from a bit like the dyslexia glasses, actual tint, having an actual tint in the glasses.
Okay.
Be really therapeutic. So a lot of people go for the kind of pink that's come out as being a really good therapeutic color at the moment. And other people who are maybe already slightly on the dyslexic spectrum, they might find a yellow or a blue. So there are places where you can actually have that assessed, what your eye responds to. These historically are probably more the places that you would take the autistics to. Again, I'm speaking about that. That you maybe would take an autistic person there, because naturally they do well with tinted glasses, and it's a bit like that whole sensory integration and sensory processing has been affected by post-COVID and the kind of issues that we're finding with the processing. So if you go and have your eyes assessed, rather than, can you see, have you got 20/20 vision? But no, if you have it actually assessed by a specialist who can recommend the right color for your lenses or have reactor lights put in, that might be helpful.
Interesting. I love the idea of having rose tinted glasses.
Yes, that's good, isn't it?
Oh, well, this has been amazing, and I feel like we could talk for hours, but I'm protecting you and I from draining our batteries too much. Sabine, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. And just in a kind of wrap up, I know there's a lot of, I'm looking through all the questions that we haven't read out, and a lot of them are very technical and very specific. And whilst I would love to put them to Sabine, I think it would be inappropriate for us to be dealing with them too much on that kind of individual basis. So thank you everyone for the amazing questions that you have sent in.
Yes, thank you.
They're an amazing group. They come up with some fascinating and fabulous questions. The cardiologist that we work with, Boon Lim, said to me at the beginning of my first interview, these questions are phenomenal.
Yeah.
What an amazing group.
I noticed that a lot of people have actually done their homework, and they've come up with, you can tell that people have really looked into this.
Yeah.
A lot of resources out there. I noticed somebody asked a question about the hypothalamus. I think if you look on maybe I'll put that link into the links that I give you later. It was Lynn who asked that question. There is a lot of information to that hypothalamus question. There was an actual link that I'd already inserted, which is quite helpful. A lot of, even if you look at somewhere like Headways and the brain injury library that they have, don't pay too much attention to the fact that it says brain injury. Don't pay any attention to the fact that maybe it says stroke association or, any of these things. The message is the same: how to offload your brain, how to find strategies that are compensatory, so you're offloading your brain so you can go for longer. And the the strategy is about chronic fatigue. So if you're looking into ME or chronic fatigue, the message is probably going to be very similar in terms of pacing and planning ahead and energy conservation. Pay attention to what it says on the label. The journey.
I think we've all learned an enormous amount from the CFS-ME community and all of the challenges, trials, tribulations that they've all had as a fairly silenced community for decades. So, you know, it's an amazing opportunity for that to have much more light shed on it. And we have learned so much. You know, I didn't even know what CFS stood for when I got COVID. I do now.
Yeah, that's probably the one good thing that we can name straight away that's come out of all of this, is that where we thought maybe before, oh, that's for the people who are just putting it on, who are actually lazy and tired, you know. We might have blamed the vegans for something really inappropriate. You know,
right.
This can happen to anyone, and we're seeing it, you know, and now it's validated that whole society, like you say, you know, that whole cohort of patients that were there before that didn't feel validated or listened to.
Totally in the shadows.
Yeah, now we understand what it is.
My goodness, do we? And actually, I think there's just something extraordinarily powerful about meeting other people that can empathize, you know, and I think that's the power of the social media groups that we have. We've got people that understand and support and empathize and kind of share that space with you, which I think is so important. And when I think about those communities that were just marginalized because they weren't better yet, what kind of people are they? You know, they're not better yet. That has, you know, for a lot of people, that has been a real kind of a wake-up call to the struggles of others. So, you know, if nothing else, I think I would like to imagine there's now a couple of million in the UK alone, more empathic people.
Yes, that's a good thought, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. That's what we need.
There we go. Sabine, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and to meet you tonight. So
likewise.
I will definitely be back in touch asking for links and stuff to put in with the film, but otherwise, thank you so much once again. All right.
You're very welcome. Goodbye to everyone, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.